So I have this interaction. I have had this kind of interaction with folks over the years, whether it's on social media or responding to emails that I write or in workshops. And it's where people come back to me with, it's great for other people to leave academia. And genuinely, like I celebrate that. I think that's great. The world needs blah, blah, blah. Awesome. Fantastic. Great. But but the point they're making is that that's great for someone else, but it's not something that they could ever imagine doing because staying in academia, this is where they thrive. This is what they're so good at. This is their contribution, their passion, their dream, whatever it is. And that's when it's like a stab to the heart for me because I don't want to disagree with them, but I feel like I know that there's something in there. Like I feel like I'm making a hand gesture, like there's an onion here. I wonder because, and I'm not sure right this very second if I could identify all those onion layers, but maybe the four of us could start to name and peel away some of those layers. Does that make sense?
I hear you
Uh,
on the onion, Jen.
Yeah, right? Because I think some like years ago, I feel like maybe 10 years ago, and then I'll let you talk. I'll let you talk. But let me set this up by saying, I think like 10 years ago, there was often this sense out there that just even imagining like leaving academia for anyone, and of course, and something to know about me, I have a humanities background, and I think, that's the academic culture I was coming out of. That just the idea that anybody would want to do this was bad. Was a bad thing. But the shift that they were saying was like, no, I celebrate this. Oh, but not for me.
well, it feels like there's some element of judgment in there, right? Like I'm not going to judge you for what you want to do, but I'm not the kind of person who would leave academia.
Have
So
different
I think we
values.
have to maybe the first layer of the onion is this question of where do we get these ideas that it's bad to leave academia? Why do we think that that you're less than if you leave?
Because academia has a superiority complex. Like, it feels like to me, and this may have been my experience in academia, but I think I've experienced this and walked away from it. There's sort of this idea that academia is the career, the best career, where the best minds go and the best people stay. And that if you're doing anything else, if it's for profit, it's evil. If you chose something else, it's because you failed and you didn't actually make it.
You
And I
couldn't cut it. You
Yeah,
couldn't
and you
cut
couldn't cut
it.
it, right? And I think that the funny thing is that the more I have, I'm now on my third career. I've worked with folks to work in all sorts of jobs. This notion that any one job is better than another, that some line of work is superior to another, is really peculiar, actually, when you look at it, right? It's like there are different jobs for different purposes. People pick them based on what they want to do in the world. How do we have to make one of those okay versus not okay to feel good about ourselves? So at least for me, I've developed a more tolerant, like, there's a lot of different ways to sort of skin this cat of work that you do in your life.
What a
Sorry,
metaphor.
wrong metaphor for a cat person. But yeah, this notion that like any form of work is superior to one another, I think academia perpetuates that, but I just don't think it's true.
Gabrielle, do you know what I'm talking about? Because I can imagine the comeback being like, well, that's because Tori, you were never meant to be a scholar.
I think there's a lot of that. I mean, I think that certainly coming through my graduate program, people could not comprehend anything other than academia being your first choice. I started my graduate program planning to go into policy research, and folks could think about that. Oh, yeah, that makes sense as a good backup plan. But they couldn't comprehend that that could be a first choice and that you wouldn't want to go into academia. Now, I obviously switched gears and became an academic for a while, but they're very persuasive.
Ah!
But it's interesting that they just couldn't seem to comprehend that distinction. Um, yeah. And I
I
think
think.
what Tori's getting at is also this idea of vocational awe, right?
Mhm.
Of just the moral superiority.
Yeah.
of academia.
Yeah. And and we've heard people say this. People say this with a straight face. It is the best job in the world. And
Yeah.
some people, when they say that, they don't mean for me. They mean period.
Yeah.
For anybody. And they pity, it almost reminds me of these like religious evangelists out there. I'm not making a direct comparison. Obviously, it's different, but there's something to the like, there's right? Pity, that, oh, you haven't been called yet, or whatever the language around that is. And it's sort of it's sad for you.
Yeah,
Ooh, I hate that. Hate that.
I would love to tear apart that idea because I always I think, I bought into that idea that it is honorable and it is just and it is something to be proud of, that you are an educator and you're going into academia and you have a PhD and look at me, I'm so special. But and yes, of course, there's a ton that is honorable about being an educator. But let's look at what higher ed institutions have become in the last 50 plus years, right? I mean, probably there are ways they always were terrible, but at least for this conversation, having now started my own business and being somebody who looked at capitalists as profit driven, people who are going to sacrifice their staff and the well being of everybody that works for them, and everything is about the money. I don't see very much different between that image in universities today. And so I have to question, yes, I think people who go into teaching and academia and research have the best intentions, but the institutions themselves have become so corrupted that they've lost that high ground, the moral high ground. You really can't criticize business owners these days when higher ed does what it does to its people.
And
Boom.
the implication of higher ed being somehow morally superior, right, is that it's worth sacrificing for. It's worth making extreme personal sacrifices in order to have this amazing job. And yeah, and that somehow is better than working for a company that makes trade-offs or makes sacrifices.
So in the sciences, there's this really strong narrative that is you're still a scientist. So it's like, okay, step one, we can accept that you're going to go into industry and, whatever, right? But okay, let's accept that. And then there's this claiming of people of like, but you're still going to be a scientist. You can still call yourself a scientist. And like, to a certain extent, I get where people are going with that, but I think it comes back to exactly what we're talking about is you're still, if you, by saying that, you're placing higher value on what you would consider to be scientific work than at any other type of work. And so I'm sort of like, fuck that noise. Let's embrace not being a scientist. So am I making sense?
Yeah, well, and Jen, it's interesting as you're talking, two things are coming to mind. One are these like identity labels we give ourselves, these groups we bucket ourselves in as scientists, whatever. I was doing a conversation earlier this week where someone called me an ex-PhD. And I'm like, no, I'm not an ex-PhD. I'm an ex-academic. Like my PhD's for forever, right? But this sort of like, what are these labels by which we choose to define ourselves? And what do they mean about us? But what's interesting is that then when we take those identities and then make judgments about them, what I'm thinking about as we're talking is so weird is that I think many folks in academia would consider themselves tolerant of a number of different life choices in different ways, right? Like an academic would look at me and say like, oh, you don't have kids. Like I can appreciate that, right? Like you're a woman who chose not to have kids. I can appreciate that. You're a person who chose to live outside the US. I can appreciate that. But you chose a career other than academia, excommunicated, right? And so it's so funny to take that strong dogmatic approach that I think in many others of their life, like academics would probably be pretty tolerant, maybe not of opposing, academic views, but like it's funny that like I think folks who would consider themselves tolerant can be so intolerant in that one choice And so I'd ask folks to consider that, like, if you wouldn't judge folks for other life choices, what makes you judge them for their career choice? It's an interesting mental gymnastics, huh?
And how do you get past then judging yourself? Let's say that they can celebrate the choices that you made and then that makes sense for you. But what if it's, oh, but that's because she was never cut out for this in the first place. So that's okay for her. How do you shift that? I think you need to shift that thought for your own self.
I'm going to echo that right back to you, Jen. So how do you help folks in your program with either self-judgment or judgment of others?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm laughing because now we got to talk tactics. What do you actually have to do here? Okay. I was talking to clients yesterday, and one of them told me, and I've heard this before, but in the moment I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad you said that," which is the most important work that he's been doing as part of my program. This is a professor. The most important work that he's doing as part of my job search program is the focus section. And the focus, and I was like, oh, but that's the section that has like almost no videos in it. It's all worksheets. And he's like, well, yes, exactly. That's the most important piece. It's the self-reflection work. It's the what do you value? What's important to you? What are your goals and priorities? Like, what are yours? What are yours now? And what are your skills? And it demands that you focus on what's important to you. And if you can give yourself permission, please, I think the four of us would give you permission to say, at least for the purposes of the exercise, I don't want you to channel what your academic advisor would say. And, right? I don't channel what you're hearing from your discipline. What's important to you now? That's hard work. That's hard work.
I also think we can shift the way that we think about educating in the 21st century, because if what's important to you is educating and spreading knowledge and teaching and, mentoring and advising and all the stuff that we love about our academic jobs, when really it's all the administrative BS that goes on that we hate. Like, it's the 21st century. We have Zoom. Like, how can you teach and how can you be a mentor? How can you train people to learn how to use statistical software? How can you coach them in public speaking? How can you edit their papers, whatever, right? And so you can do all those things that you love without being inside the trappings of a traditional higher ed institution or a research place, So I
Yeah.
think you can do all the things that you love and celebrate those values and honor them without having to be stuck in a place that treats you terribly.
I mean, I think that's such a good point. And this is something that academics would demand of themselves and their colleagues in their own work is what do you mean? And to really clarify and specify what what the words that they're saying actually mean. And it's so easy for them, experts in this, experts in clarity of communication, right? It's so easy for them to just say, well, I love teaching, I must teach. I love research. And it's like, what do you actually mean? Like that is such a key exercise for folks to do.
I would add to that that a lot of it is about kind of you don't know what you don't know. So there are elements of my academic job that I can't get anywhere else. I love standing in front of a college classroom and leading a discussion. That doesn't exist anywhere else. Yes, I can still do some mentoring, I can lead discussions, I can teach things, but it isn't the same. But the thing is that that teaching was the highlight of that job, but that doesn't make it the best thing to do ever or the only thing that I enjoy doing. So it was the high of a job where there were also a lot of lows. And I've held 3 non-academic jobs now, and none of them have tasks that hit the same high of teaching in the same way, but none of them so far have tasks that hit the same lows as the things I didn't like in academia, and everything's more even. and more predictable and more consistently enjoyable, if that makes sense. So it's even if there's a particular thing in academia that you do absolutely love, that doesn't mean that there aren't other things you also enjoy doing that you maybe don't know exist yet.
I think that not knowing what exists is also really, really important, and to keep an open mind about that, which is something that a scholar would also demand of themselves. But Gabrielle, if you were my client and you are not, I would say, okay, so teaching in a university classroom is actually a lot of different things. Let's parse those out. What specific moments of that are actually the ones that excite you? And can we remove those from this context potentially? And can you find those specific bits? You don't like the bro who's heckling you. Right? I mean, you don't like the basement classroom with no windows. I mean, right? I mean, but there are bits that you like, and what are those? Anyways, I'm going on and on and on. How we do
We're
for
getting
time,
to
Tori?
transferable skills. Don't go there yet. Don't go
Don't
there
go
yet.
there.
I was going to say, you'll note I said I like standing in front of a classroom
Standing in
and
front of
leading
the
a
classroom.
discussion. And I don't like grading, and I don't like creating the materials. And there's a reason I didn't go into instructional design leaving
Yeah,
academia.
yeah.
Those were the bits I didn't want to keep.
Well, maybe you
So
can,
yeah, breaking
yeah,
that
yeah,
down
yeah, yeah. And
matters a
you could
lot.
probably find opportunities to do that.
Mhm.
Unless it's 18-year-olds you really want to talk with, in which case.
I do. I want to second that, what Jen is saying, because I think when I became an editor, I felt it was great to be alone. I loved being away from people initially, but then I really missed that interaction of being in front of a classroom. And now that I have a group program with, 15 to 20 people, it is very much like teaching a college classroom, except you don't have the bro that's heckling you. And I'm not talking about US politics, thank God. And, you get to choose who's in and who's out. If somebody's not a good fit, you don't enroll them in your program. And so, yeah, I think that with technology and with a bit of creativity, you can put together courses, workshops, group coaching, that kind of stuff that is quite not exactly the same, but quite similar in all the best ways, I think.
Yeah, I really believe that. And I don't mean to, let's not pick on Gabrielle, but I believe, yeah, for a lot of things, let's say for a lot of things in academia, I think if you can clarify for yourself what exactly is the thing that was like, yes, what exactly is that? And then, okay, what are other contexts where you can experience that? How are we doing on this onion?
Well, can I make one other point? And then
One other,
I
yes.
think we're probably near time. But the thing that's occurring to me as I'm listening to this is, Gabrielle saying like, okay, I really like that, but that doesn't make that the superior thing. I think when we haven't taken the time to reflect on what we want or what we like, it's easy to use other people's proxies, right? Oh, our professor says this is important, so this is what must be important. My parents say this is what's important, so this is what's important. This is what teachers have rewarded me for, and so this is what I think I like. And when we haven't taken that time to reflect, we sort of let other people's proxies become ours. And it's so unfortunate, right? Because I think for each of us, there is that opportunity to reflect and say, what really matters to me? What do I want to do in my life? What do I enjoy? What am I strongest at? And without that reflection, we unfortunately just get pulled along with other people's agendas and other people's goals. And so almost taking that, well, people say this is the most important, so it's the most important. We lose the opportunity to be more self-directed, self-advocating. And yeah, it is a little bit sticky to get into our own heads and do a little self-reflection and say what really matters to me. There are folks who will actively avoid that because it's like, it's easier to just let other folks make the choices. But I think for many of us, if we hear that, sort of hear like, oh shoot, I'm missing an opportunity to steer and define my own life. Let me at least take an initial pass at that instead of letting other people's goals and values drive my life. I do think sometimes that can happen in academia just because the messaging is so loud about what matters. But when we really take the time to think about it and get clear, we realize that what we care about may not be 100% overlapped with what academia tells us is important.
Yeah, awesome. So what are some key points that we're all making here? One is you got to give yourself permission to be, well, and frankly, a good scholar and a good scientist. to keep an open mind, right? To do the research, the appropriate research for your specific question, to clarify exactly what you're talking about, right? Clear communication, clear thinking, all of that. I'm sure I'm missing things, but like that's all really, really important. Um, yeah, what would you guys want, what would you folks want to be a takeaway here?
Don't worry what other people think. You have to think
Yeah.
for yourself and decide, like Tori was just saying, what works for you and then build it, right? We live in a time of amazing possibility. Think about what you really want and then go after it.
Yeah.
Though, Paulina, that's a whole different video. Don't worry what people think. We could do a whole different video on that one. Like, for many folks, that is easier said than done. But I 100% champion that. And I encourage folks, I really like what you said, Jen, about like be a scholar and apply your scholarship to that same question of like, is scholarship, the best thing? Like, let me investigate that as a hypothesis. Let me do some due diligence to investigate that belief, right? That belief is not so sacred that it can't also be examined using the same sort of scholarly techniques. So I think that's a really great point to reinforce.
Yeah, nothing is sacred here. Nothing is sacred. Gabrielle, you want to give us a takeaway?
You don't want to end on nothing is sacred. Yeah, I mean, I think I would just echo that this is that we need to take the kind of moral absolutes out of this process, that there is no inherently moral position that academia holds. And what you're talking about in your program of really helping people break down the details of what is that thing that you really thrive doing, helps people get away from the moral questions in a really concrete way.
Yeah.
That's sort of a safe way around no, academia is the best thing ever. It's really, well, let's break that down. And which specific thing was the best thing ever for you?
Yeah. So to go back to the onion metaphor, I guess the onion is the layers of our own nonsense. We just gotta peel those away one at a time and what's left at the core and then go from there. Thank you. Love chatting with y'all.